We've got a update from Nayek from Holland about Africa and a couple of pointers that we've pulled up for this, and the use of GMO in cotton that's ongoing, particularly in Kenya, and also heard from sources in Mali and Burkina Faso. Now, Burkina Faso has stopped using GMO cotton seeds, which is a good thing. However, Kenya just gave the green light for it. And it said Kenya, the government makes a landmark decision to approve genetically modified or BT cotton. And this resolution does not specifically address Kenya's 2012 ban on GM crops. But a moratorium is essentially over because the cabinet memo says other GMOs will be considered on a case-by-case basis, according to the Kenya Agricultural Research Institute. Now, according to that particular institute, BT cotton has a potential to increase income in the textile industry from the current SH 3.5 billion to SH 2 trillion. I think that's shekels. I could be wrong. By 2022, and create 500,000 cotton jobs and 100,000 new jobs in cloth making. They'll always state that nonsense, but those figures never ever materialise. But by that time, you've already gone along with it. It's the seducement package. You know, if you can do that, you can go and make hemp. Would that not create 500,000 jobs and 100,000 new jobs in cloth making? Same thing. Now, the once thriving cotton industry collapsed between the late 1980s and 90s after the liberalisation of the agriculture sector following introduction of SAPs that were done by, no surprise here, the World Bank and the IMF. Proving this show correct again. The people of Africa need to throw those two organisations along with the UN, which is the part of the same World Bank and IMF, and throw them all out. They're all harvesting companies and death and destruction as well. Then we got a report of the GDP in Africa, written by Pascal Neurosera, and he wrote, "Did you know that in 1994, Africa was poorer than it was in 1974? So much for Live Aid. The per capita GDP, as measured in US dollars, was $1,166 in 1994, and yet in 1974 it was $1,531. $400 less 20 years later, despite Live Aid. As this show has told you, that Live Aid was another slush fund. It appears none of it went to the African people. Now, some economists blame structural adjustment programs imposed yet again by the IMF and the World Bank for causing this decline. The belt-tightening programs emphasise the short term to the detriment of investment in education, health, and also agriculture. And this short-termism, combined with weak institutions inherited from colonialism, created a conducive environment for corrupt leaders to flourish that further worsened the situation there. You know, in the last 25 years, Africa is slowly but steadily recovering from the lost years, with the per capita GDP reaching $1,657 per person last year, which is only $126 higher than it was in 1974. With the population it is said set to explode in the coming decades, I wouldn't count on that. The current rate of economic progress is still far from enough. The task ahead for African leaders is to rethink growth from scratch, and you won't be doing that by short-term measures by agreeing to GMO cotton either. And test unconventional ideas that democratize opportunities for all. Simply imitating what worked in Asia won't save the masses from a hard life, as the geopolitical conditions are different today than they were 50 years ago, when Africa screwed up while the rest of the world saw relentless progress. I wouldn't necessarily agree that it was all Africa. It was a deliberate program ran by the UN, the IMF and the World Bank, in league with the Black Dragon Group of China, which is why they've put lots of funds in there. So when you can't pay the debts, they just take the assets. I would pay close attention to all your ports, as they did it in India. Infograph, as in the file Africa stats based on the World Bank and FAO, was used as attached. Now, the role of the IMF and World Bank and their structural adjustment programs, which means put everyone in debt and take all assets, were already questioned and played out in an informal court in the movie called Bamako, which was came out in 2006. And Niexta watched the movie again some weeks ago, and some of the remarks made in the movie could and should be made again today. Now, there's been heavy investment in chemical fertilizer in Africa, and information from a person whom Nayak met in Ghana said he was very worried about the completion of the largest chemical inorganic fertilizer plant in Africa that will indeed, on one hand, enhance production of crop production on the short term, here we go again, short-termism, but will destroy the earth as well if it's not applied with sufficient amounts of organic matter. And this person said in his past life as a soil scientist, he had never seen that land fertilized with chemical fertilizer will maintain a nutrients balance, i.e. outputs of nutrients equals inputs. There is always more nutrients exported from the soil than applied. Now, in Guinea-Conakry, part of a region is destroyed by fertilizers in the past, and now regenerative measures are desperately needed. And he says, here rethinking is also needed for safeguarding agricultural production in the future. And then they gave an update as the year ends, an update on Africa's biggest petrochemical fertilizer factory, and the main component, which is the world's biggest crude oil distillation train tower, has been shipped to the site and successfully installed last month. This was what was mainly causing the delay, therefore production of raw materials and fertilizer is possible to begin next year. With the project's stated capacity, pace and concessions, the future quality of soil, food and natural water reserves or reservoirs in West Africa and even Africa as a whole is looking very bleak in reality. And he said, although very challenging times ahead, we will still enter and face the coming year with hope and determination. And is hoping that the people wake up to what's going on in that country. Like I said, we've warned about the UN, the IMF, World Bank, and also Citibank. All of them need to be thrown out. Citibank is the like the Federal Reserve of Africa, where all the funds have to filter through their bank. So it looks like they've got loads of money when it actually belongs elsewhere. That's how it works. More than half of sub-Saharan Africans lack access to electricity. Africa will require an unprecedented effort to meet the UN's targets of electricity for all by 2030. Since when have the UN have been interested in people? In most parts of the world, energy demand is growing too quickly to keep greenhouse gas emissions from international targets, according to a report released by the International Energy Agency, a think tank group. So we can take no notice of them then. Many in Africa, however, worry about the opposite problem, the acute shortage of electricity, and the continent is home to almost a fifth of the world's population, but accounts for less than 4% of global electricity use. So it's almost 20% of the world's population, but only 4% electricity. Now, North Africa enjoys near universal access to electricity, yet more than half of the sub-Saharan population, 600 million people, live in the dark. That has to be addressed, and quickly.